My name is Patricia Kane, and I was the lead curator for this exhibition, Art and Industry in Early America. This exhibition chronicles furniture making in Rhode Island from the time of settlement in the 1600s until 1830, when a wholesale furniture market began to develop and the small shop tradition began to decline. We present here some of the most iconic pieces of furniture made in Newport and Providence in the mid-18th century, but another of our goals was to present the earliest furniture as well as furniture made throughout the state and colony of Rhode Island. So join me now for a tour of this exhibition. We are now in the 17th century area of the exhibition. Rhode Island was settled in 1636 by Roger Williams, who was driven out of Massachusetts because of a number of his beliefs. Williams believed in religious toleration, he believed in the separation of church and state, and he believed that the Indians should be compensated for their land. Because of these beliefs, others of like ideas settled in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island really became very religiously diverse. It was quite different than Massachusetts and Connecticut. It was also much smaller. So there's very little 17th century furniture that survives from Rhode Island. Another reason for this is that in 1675 and 76, King Philip's War, the war with the Indians, destroyed many of the towns in Rhode Island, and much of its furniture from that period was probably destroyed as well. The only chest that we know from Providence is this example, which is attributed to a Dutchman named John Clausen. Likewise, from Newport, there's very little 17th century furniture identified. This wainscot chair and this turn chair are thought to be made there. Next to them is part of a box pew from the church in Bristol, Rhode Island, that was built in 1684-85. We've included it in the exhibition to underscore the fact that the men who made woodwork for houses and public buildings like the church were the same craftsmen who were making the joined furniture. In addition to the Newport turn chair, on the other side of the gallery, we have a turn chair from Kingston, Rhode Island, or it could have been made as far west as Westerly. And next to that are two examples of a small group of furniture which seems to come out of Warren, Rhode Island, that has a geometric rosette design carved into its panels. And behind me, you can see Peter Follansbee making a reproduction of this carving in the video, which is in the gallery. We're now in the early 18th century section of the exhibition. Sometimes we refer to this period as the William and Mary style. And most of the furniture made in America at this time was veneered, usually with very complex pieces of burl maple that were glued to the surfaces of the wood. Much of the furniture that has this kind of decoration comes from Massachusetts, and very little had been identified from Rhode Island. But in the course of our study, we were able to identify characteristics which enabled us to define a group of objects that we believe were made in Rhode Island during this time period. So the pieces often have this vertical stripe which divides the facades into two compartments. We identified that as a feature that you find on most of the case pieces on this side of the gallery. The pieces that had that feature often had secondary woods that Rhode Island furniture makers like to use, like yellow poplar and chestnut, or they had family histories in Rhode Island. And on the high chests and the dressing tables, The legs tended to be turned to a very narrow dimension right above the stretcher, which seemed to typify the Rhode Island turning style. Furniture makers in Newport made very distinctive tables in the early 18th century. They were either small side tables or large drop-leaf tables used for dining. And what's distinctive about them is the shape of the turning on the legs. They typically have an elongated baluster above a ring, and below the ring, a small ball. And it's a shape that was made no other place in the colonies, and it relates quite closely to turnings on stair banisters, like the one that you see here in the exhibition that came from the Wanton Lyman Hazard House, built in Newport in 1697. In the exhibition, we have a video of Joshua Klein making a banister-back chair, actually a reproduction of the one on the top of the chair wall, on a treadle lathe. So banister-back chairs like these began to be made in Rhode Island in the early 18th century, and they were made all over the colony. On the wall, we have chairs from Portsmouth, Westerly, Newport, Providence, and immediately to my right, a chair that was made in Newport. We've now entered the section of the exhibition that covers the period from 1740 to 1760, and it's introduced by this overmantel painting of Newport in about 1740. What it shows us is this area here called Easton's Point, where most of the cabinet makers and the shipbuilders lived. It also shows the growing town of Newport with the Quaker Meeting House, the Colony House, and a very small town dock. And that's all about to change. Newport merchants would soon build Long Wharf jutting way out into the harbor. And that change is really driven by the arrival of this gentleman, John Bannister, who comes from Boston to Newport in the late 1730s. And he establishes direct trade with London, which allows Newport merchants to no longer have to transship their goods to Boston and then to Newport, but to be able to send boats directly across the Atlantic to Newport. In the exhibition, we also have this archway from the house that Bannister built as a country house in Middletown, just north of Newport, in the 1750s. And it reminds us once again that the makers who did this fine interior woodwork for public buildings and houses often were the same people who were constructing the furniture. Here with these two desks and bookcases, we have the progenitors of the so-called Goddard Townsend School of Cabinet Making in Newport, Rhode Island. The desk to my right was signed by Job Townsend, and he had three sons, Job, Edmund, and Thomas, who became cabinet makers, as well as an apprentice, John Goddard, who became one of the very well-known Newport cabinet makers. His younger brother, Christopher, made the desk and bookcase to my left. It is the only American piece of furniture that survives with its original silver hardware. And the hardware was made by this silversmith, Samuel Casey, who worked in Kingston, Rhode Island. The desk and bookcase is extraordinary for other reasons as well. All its secondary wood is mahogany, the drawer linings, the backboards, the bottom boards, which is very unusual. And the bookcase doors have the blocked decoration crowned by shelves that become the iconic feature of Rhode Island furniture in the mid-18th century. In this gallery, we also have a desk made by John Goddard that has a label which would indicate it was made for export to Canada, and a large part of the cabinet makers in Newport and Providence made furniture for export, or what they called venture cargo. In this gallery, we also have a high chest with china steps on its top that was made by Christopher Townsend and is also signed by his son John. as well as a tea table by Christopher and a high chest of drawers with a scrolled pediment that was made by John Townsend when he was only 23 years old. In this section of the exhibition, we talk about chair making in Newport, Rhode Island. Here we have an easy chair, which is really an extraordinary survivor. It is the only American easy chair that has its original flame stitch upholstery and on the front and sides of the wings. This upholstery was probably done by professional embroiderers and may have been made in England and imported to Newport. The back panel of the chair, however, was done by a schoolgirl, probably from Newport, sent to Boston to go to school at one of the Boston Dames schools, where she did the upholstery panel. It relates very closely to known Boston embroidered pictures. Also, we have here side chairs that were made in Newport. They have very distinct characteristics, particularly in the turnings of their stretchers, that differentiate them from similar examples that were made in Massachusetts. At the end of this gallery, we have an overmantel picture of John Potter and his family having tea. They're sitting around a round tea table, which is covered by tea wares. And the Potter family lived in South Kingston, Rhode Island, and this painting introduces us to a section of the exhibition that shows furniture that was made on the western part of Narragansett Bay. These are the pieces that were made in the western side of Narragansett Bay. The high chest, for instance, was made in Coventry, Rhode Island. Part of our discipline in doing this project was to read through all the Rhode Island court records up to about 1800 and all the land, probate, and town meeting records in every Rhode Island town. And by doing that, we grew the list of makers from about 300 to 2,000. And so, as with this piece, when the owner told me it had the initials AS and the date 1749 on its back, I was able to look at our list of makers, and the only one I had who worked in 1749 with those initials was Amos Stafford, who was a house carpenter in Coventry, Rhode Island, and that helped us make the attribution of this piece to him. Next to it is a dressing table that was owned by Carter Hazard, who lived in South Kingston, and we believe that this table was made in that area. It stands next to a desk and bookcase, which were probably made in Bristol. They have very distinctive compass star inlay decoration on them, which was a decorative motif used throughout New England, but these are examples of how that motif was interpreted by Rhode Island makers. We're now in the section of the exhibition that covers the period from 1760 to 1790, where we see the fully developed block front form here in these 5 bureau tables that were all made in Newport, Rhode Island, and each one of them is signed by a different maker. On the opposite side of the room, we have a mahogany porringer top table like the one that the Malbone sons are using in the portrait of them. Beyond that is a chair that descended in John Townsend's family, and next to it, a group of 3 associated with the workshop of John Goddard, as is the card table that sits below a painting of Dr. William Hunter's spaniels sleeping under a very similar card table. We're now in the gallery that shows the pinnacle of the Rhode Island block and shell style, with examples from Providence on my right, including the great desk and bookcase made by Daniel Spencer for John Brown, and examples on my left, including in the center of the wall, this desk and bookcase which is attributed to John Goddard of Newport. And next to it is a high chest of drawers that was made by Benjamin Baker, also of Newport. It shows a really remarkable example of a unique Rhode Island feature, and that is a claw and ball foot that has undercut talons. In the exhibition, we present Yale's high chest, signed by John Townsend in 1759, taken apart so people can see how it's constructed. They can also see on the back of the drawers the large letters that the Townsend shop used to keep their drawer parts straight. Most cabinet makers used either letters or numbers or other symbols to help organize these pieces when they were constructing and prepping an object. And behind me is a video of Jeffrey Green, a cabinet maker in Newport, Rhode Island, who is demonstrating how to carve a shell, how to cut dovetails, how to carve a claw and ball foot. And he's actually made demonstration pieces that the public can handle to examine these steps in the various making processes firsthand. These two easy chairs and the side chair with an embroidered slip seat are rare examples of how floral embroidery is used to ornament upholstery. The pattern of the easy chair shows flowers springing from a basket at the base of the back. And these flower shapes and the furly leaves that are part of the design derive from this textile tradition of palampours made in India for export to the West. These palampours were used for bed hangings and bed coverings. One of the surprising results of our research was to realize that Warren, Rhode Island, was a real center of cabinet making. And these two pieces, the high chest of drawers and the desk and bookcase, were both made there. We don't know who made the high chest, but Cromwell Child commissioned it for his daughter's marriage in 1776. And the desk and bookcase was made by Ichabod Cole in 1790. He was the great-great-great-great-grandson of Hugh Cole, who owned the wainscot chair in the first section of the exhibition. Opposite these pieces are objects made in the other small towns of Rhode Island. The desk and bookcase was made by Thomas Spencer in Greenwich. The chair next to it was made by Ambrose Taylor, who worked in Warwick. And the tall case clock was made in Westerly, Rhode Island. Ezra Stiles was the minister of the Second Congregational Church in Newport, Rhode Island, and he is seated in a low-back Windsor chair, the earliest type of Windsor chair made in Newport. Next to Philadelphia, Newport was the center of Windsor chair making in late colonial America. There's a high-back version to my right of the type of chair that Stiles is seated in. Here we have a display of bow-back and sack-back Windsor chairs. And above the chairs is a portrait of Captain Samuel Packard, who is seated in a sack-back chair like the one in front of the painting. We know he's a sea captain because of the telescope he holds and this portrait of his ship, which is in the background of the painting. Here we are in the federal section of the exhibition, where we have furniture made in the smaller towns, like the tall case clock from Bristol and the card table from Warren, and then this tall case clock from Westerly, where it was made for this gentleman, Thomas Noyes. We also have a chair that was owned in South Kingston and a tall case clock made in Warwick. Newport was heavily damaged by the British during their occupation during the Revolutionary War, but its economy finally came back. We have new cabinet makers like Holmes Weaver and the sons of John Goddard, Stephen and Thomas, making furniture into the first years of the 19th century, as well as John Townsend working in a totally different neoclassical style. Unlike Newport, Providence was not occupied by the British during the Revolution, and its economy rebounded quicker. So by the 18 teens, Providence was really a large, thriving city, as we see in this painting by Alvin Fisher. Some of the pre-revolutionary cabinet makers continued to work. The chair, for instance, was made by John Carlyle and his sons, who had joined him in the business. We don't know who made the beautiful sideboard that has initials engraved in silver and also inlaid in wood in its design. But we believe the dressing bureau was made by Joseph Rawson, the son of Grindal Rawson, who worked before the war. And the table at the very end was made by Samuel and Joseph Rawson, the sons of Joseph Rawson. So there's a great continuity here in the story of Providence furniture of the Federal period. In conjunction with this exhibition, we have published a 500-page book which records all the furniture in the exhibition and provides lots of detailed photographs of their ornament and signatures of the makers who made them. In that book, you can learn a lot more about the pieces I've talked about today.